Hello and welcome. My name is Alan, and we are back with more Southern horrors and other writings. Before we get into the video, as you can see, I've finally got me a webcam again. This one don't have the ring light like the last one, so I'm not in it as bright as I tend to be, but hopefully y'all can still see. Besides, I have images that I tend to have for my videos anyway, so. But I have two ways to donate to the channel if you are so inclined. I have a Patreon account, which is a month-to-month monthly donation system, and I have a Ko-fi account, which can do much the same, but also allow you to donate single one-time donations. I'll have both listed in the description box below the video. If you are in financial trouble, please do not donate. I'd rather you be able to take care of what you need to take care of. It's just tough for everybody right now with the idiots in charge. If you can donate and you wish to donate with it without it putting yourself in tough uh, times, then thank you. I really do appreciate it. I mean, honestly, um, it's me, myself, and I who do these videos, and as a personal choice, I don't do commercials, and then I'm not getting money from any of the actual videos themselves. With that said, let's jump into the video. Today we'll be reading two pieces. First one called Was Charles a Desperado? The press of the country has united in declaring that Robert Charles was a desperado. As usual when dealing with a Negro, he is assumed to be guilty because he is charged. Even the most conservative of journalists refuse to ask evidence to prove that the dead man was a criminal and that his life had been given over to lawbreaking. The minute that the news was flashed across the country that he had shot a white man, it was at once declared that he was a fiend incarnate and that when he was killed, the community would be ridden of a black-hearted desperado. The reporters of the New Orleans papers, who were in the best position to trace the record of this man's life, made every possible effort to find evidence to prove that he was a villain unhung. With all the resources at their command and inspired by intense interest to paint him as black a villain as possible, these reporters signally failed to disclose a single indictment which charged Robert Charles with a crime. Because they failed to find any legal evidence that Charles was a lawbreaker and desperado, his accusers gave full license to the imagination and distorted the facts that they had obtained in every possible way to prove a course of criminality which the records absolutely refused to show. Charles had his first encounter with the police Monday night, in which he was shot in the street duel which begun by the police after Officer Moore had beaten Charles 3 or 4 times over the head with his billy in an attempt to make an illegal arrest. In defending himself against the combined attack of 2 officers with a billy and their guns upon him, Charles shot Officer Mora and escaped. Every Tuesday morning, Charles was traced to Dryad Street by officers who were instructed to kill him on sight. There, again defending himself, he shot and killed 2 officers. This, of course, in the eyes of the American press, made him a desperado. The New Orleans press, in substantiating the charges that he was a desperado, make statements which will be interesting to examine. In the first place, the New Orleans Times-Democrat of July the 25th calls Charles a ravisher and daredevil. It says that from all the sources that could be searched, the testimony was cumulative at the character of the murderer, Robert Charles, is that the daredevil and a fiend in human form. Then in the same article it says, the belongings of Robert Charles, which were found in his room, were a complete index to the character of the man. Although the room and its contents were in a state of chaos on account of the frenzied search for clues by officers and citizens, an examination of his personal effects revealed the mental state of the murderer and the rancor in his heart toward the Caucasian race. Never was the adage, a little learning is a dangerous thing, better exemplified than in the case of a Negro who shot to death the 2 officers. His room was searched, and the evidence upon the charge that he was a desperado consisted of pamphlets in support of a Negro immigration to Liberia. On the mantelpiece there was found a bullet mode and an outfit for reloading cartridges. There were also 2 pistol scabbards and a bottle of cocaine. The other evidences that Charles was a desperado, the writer described as follows. In his room were found Negro periodicals and other race propaganda, most of which was in the interest of the Negroes' immigration to Liberia. There were police gazettes strewn about his room and other papers of a similar character. Well-worn textbooks bearing his name written in his own scrawling handwriting and well-filled copybooks found in his trunk showed that he had burnt the midnight oil and was desirous of improving himself intellectually in order that he might conquer the hated white race. Much of the literature found among his chattels was of a superlatively vituperative character and attacked the white race in unstinted language and asserted the equal rights of the Negro. Charles was evidently the local agent of the Voice of Missions, and a religious paper published in Atlanta, as great bundles of that sheet were found. It was edited by one Bishop Turner and seems to be the official organ of all the haters of the white race. Its editorials are anarchistic in the extreme and urge upon the Negro that the sooner he realizes that he is as good as the white man, the better it will be for him. The following verses were clipped from the journal. They were marked "till forbidden" and appeared in several successive numbers. Our sentiments, HMT. My country, 'tis of thee, dear land of Africa, of thee we sing. Land where our fathers died, land of the Negro's pride, God's truth shall ring. My native country, thee, land of black and free. My name I love, thy name I love, to see thy rocks and rills, thy woods and matchless hills, like that above. Then all thy slanderous ghouls in the bosom of Sheol forgotten lie. Thy monumental name shall live, and suns thy royal brow shall gild. Upheaved to heaven high, o'ertopping thrones. There were no valuables in his room, and if he was a professional thief, he had his headquarters for storing his plunder at some other place than in his room on 4th Street. Nothing was found in the room that could lead to the belief that he was a thief, except 50 or more small bits of soap. The reference was that every place he visited, he took all of the soap lying around, as all the bits were well worn and had seen long service on the washstand. His wearing apparel was little more than rags, and financially he was evidently not in a flourishing condition. He was in no sense a skilled workman, and his room showed, in fact, that he was nothing more than a laborer. The philosopher in the garret was a dirty wretch, and in his room his bedding and his clothing were nasty and filthy beyond belief. His object in life seemed to have been the discomfiture of the white race, and to this purpose he devoted himself with zeal. He declared himself to be a patriot and wished to be the Moses of his race. Under the title The Making of a Monster, the reporter attempts to give something of the personality of the archfiend Charles. Giving his imagination full vent, the writer says, "It is only natural that the deepest interest should attached to the personality of Robert Charles. What manner of man was this fiend incarnate? What conditions developed him? Who were the preceptors? From what ancestral strain, if any, did he derive his ferocious hatred of the whites, his cunning, his brute courage, his apostolic zeal which he displayed in spreading the propaganda of African equality? These are questions involving one of the most remarkable psychological problems in modern times. In answer to the questions which he propounds, the reporter proceeds to admit that he did not learn anything of a very desperate nature connected to Charles, and says, although Charles was a familiar figure to scores of Negroes in New Orleans, and they had been more or less intimately acquainted with him for over 2 years, curiously little can be learned of his habits or mode of life. Since the perpetration of his terrible series of crimes, it goes without saying that his former friends are inclined to be reticent. But it is reasonably certain that they have very little to tell. In regard to himself, Charles was singularly reticent for a Negro. He did not even indulge in the usual lying about his prowess and his adventures. This was possibly due to the knowledge um, he was wanted for a couple of murders. The man had sense or knowledge that he was wanted for The man had sense enough to know that it would be highly unwise to excite any curiosity about his past. When Charles first came to New Orleans, he worked here and there as a day laborer. He was employed at different times in a sawmill and on the street gangs, as a roustabout on the levee, as a helper at the sugar works, and as a coal shoveler in the engine room of the St. Charles Hotel. At each of the places where he worked, he was known as a quiet, rather surly fellow, who had little to say to anybody, and generally performed his task in morose silence. He managed to uh, he managed to convey the impression, however, of being a man of more than ordinary intelligence. A Negro named William Butts, who drives a team on the levee and lives on Washington Street near Baronne, told a Times Democrat reporter yesterday that Charles got a job about a year ago as agent for the Liberian Immigration Society, which was has headquarters at Birmingham, and has much elated at the prospect of making a living without hard labor. According to the further investigations of this reporter, Charles was also sent for Bishop Turner's Voice of Missions, the colored missionary organ of the African Methodist Church, edited by H. M. Turner of Atlanta, Georgia, concerning his service as agent for the Voice of Missions. The reporter says, he secured a number of subscribers and visited them once a month to collect the installments. In order to ensure regular payments, it was necessary to keep up enthusiasm, which was prone to wane, and Charles consequently became an active and continual preacher of the propaganda of hatred. Whatever may have been his private sentiments at the outset, his constant harping on one string must eventually have had a powerful effect upon his own mind. Exactly how he received his remuneration is uncertain, but he told several of his friends that he got a big commission, and incidentally, he solicited subscribers for a Negro paper called The Voice of the Missions, and when he struck a Negro who did not want to go to Africa himself, he begged contributions for the good of the cause. In the course of time, Charles developed into a fanatic on the subject of the Negro oppression and neglected business to indulge in wild tirades whenever he could find a listener. He became more anxious to make converts than to obtain subscribers, and more conservative darkies began to get afraid of him. Meanwhile, he got into touch with certain agitators in the North and made himself a distributing agent for their literature, a great deal of which he gave away. Making money was a secondary consideration to the cause. One of the most enthusiastic advocates of the Liberian scheme was the colored Bishop H. M. Turner of Atlanta. Turner is a man of unusual ability, has been over to Africa personally several times, and and has made himself conspicuous by denouncing laws which he claimed discriminated against the blacks. Charles was one of the bishop's disciples, and evidence has been found that seems to indicate they were in correspondence. This was all that the Times Democrats reporters could find after the most diligent search. to prove that Charles was a fiend incarnate, which the press of New Orleans and elsewhere declared him to be. The reporters of New Orleans Picayune was no more successful than their brethren of the Times Democrat. They too were compelled to substitute fiction for facts in their attempt to prove Charles a desperado. In the issue of the 26th of July, it was said that Charles was well known in Vicksburg and was there a consort of thieves. They mentioned that a man named Benson Blake was killed in 1894 or 1895, and that 5 Negroes were captured and 2 escaped. Of the 2 escaped, they claimed that Charles was one. The 4 Negroes who were captured were put in jail, and as usual, in the high state of civilization which characterizes Mississippi, the right of the person accused to a crime as an indictment by legal process and a legal trial by jury was considered an useless formality if the accused happened to be black. A mob went to the jail that night. The 4 colored men were delivered to the mob, and all 4 were hanged in the courthouse yard. The reporters evidently assumed that Charles was guilty, if in fact he was ever there, because the other 4 men were lynched. They did not consider it was a fact of any importance that Charles was never indicted. They called him a murderer on general principles. Died in self-defense. The life, character, and death of Robert Charles challenges the thoughtful consideration of all fair-minded people in the frenzy of the moment when nearly a dozen men lay dead and victims of his unerring and death-dealing aim. It was natural for a prejudiced press and for citizens in private life to denounce him as a desperado and a murderer. But sea depths are not measured when the ocean rages, nor can absolute justice be determined while public opinion is lashed into fury. There must be calmness to ensure correctness of judgment. The fury of the hour must abate before we can deal justly with any man of any cause. That Charles was not a desperado is amply shown by the discussion of the preceding chapter. The darkest pictures which the reporters could paint of Charles were quoted freely so that the public might find upon what grounds the press delivered him to be a lawbreaker. Unquestionably, the grounds are wholly insufficient. Not a line of evidence has ever been presented to prove that Charles was a fiend, which the first reports of New Orleans charge him to be. Nothing more should be required to establish this good reputation, or his good reputation, for the rule is universal that a reputation must be assumed to be good until it is proved bad. But that rule does not apply to the Negro, for as soon as he is suspected, the public judgment immediately determines that he is guilty of whatever crime he stands charged. For this reason, as a matter of duty to the race, and the simple justice to the memory of Charles, an investigation has been made of the life and character of Charles before the fatal affray which led to his death. Robert Charles was not an educated man. He was a student who faithfully investigated all the phases of oppression from which his race has suffered. That was that he was a student is simply shown by the Times Democrat report of the 25th, which says, well-worn textbooks bearing his name written in his own scrawling handwriting and well-filled copybooks found in his trunk showed that he had burned the midnight oil and desired to improve himself intellectually in order that he might conquer the hated white race. From this quotation, it will be seen that he spent the hours after days of hard toil in trying to improve himself, both in the study of textbooks and in writing. He knew that he was a student of a problem which required all the intelligence that a man could command, and he was burning his midnight oil gathering knowledge that he might better be able to come to an intelligent solution. To his aid in the study of this problem, he sought the aid of a Christian newspaper, the Voice of Missions, the organ of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. He was in communication with its editor, who is a bishop and is known all over this country as a man of learning, a lover of justice, and the defender of law and order. Charles could receive from Bishop Turner not a word of encouragement to be other than an earnest, tireless, and God-fearing student with the complex problems that affected the race. For further help and assistance in his studies, Charles turned to an organization which has existed and flourished for many years, at all times managed by men of high Christian standing and absolute integrity. These men believe and preach a doctrine that the best interest of the Negro will be subserved by an immigration from Africa or from America back to the fatherland, and they do all they can to spread the doctrine of immigration and to give material assistance to those who desire to leave America and make their future homes in Africa. This organization is known as the International Migration Society. It has its headquarters in Birmingham, Alabama. From this place, it issues pamphlets, some of which were found in the home of Robert Charles, and which pamphlets the reporters of the New Orleans papers declare to be incendiary and dangerous in their doctrine and teaching. Nothing can be further from the truth. Copies of any and all of them may be secured by writing to DJ Flummer, who is president and in charge of the Home Office in Birmingham, Alabama. 3 of the pamphlets found in Charles' room were named respectively. First, Prospectus of the Liberian Colonization Society, which pamphlet in a few brief pages tells of the work of the society, plans, prices, and terms of transportation of colored people who choose to go to Africa. These pages were followed for a short conservative discussion of the Negro question and close with an argument that Africa furnishes the best asylum for the oppressed Negroes in this country. The second pamphlet is entitled Christian Civilization in Africa. This is a brief statement of the advantages of the Republic of Liberia and an argument in support of the superior conditions which colored people may attain by leaving the South and settling in Liberia. The third pamphlet is entitled The Negro and Liberia. This is a larger document than the other two and treats more exhaustively the question of immigration, but from the first page to the last there is not an incendiary line or sentence. There is not even a suggestion of violence in all of its 32 pages, and not a word which could not be preached from every pulpit in the land. If it is true that the workman is known by his tools, certainly no harm could ever come from the doctrines which were preached by Charles or the papers and pamphlets distributed by him. Nothing ever written in the Voice of Missions, and nothing ever published in the pamphlets had alluded to in the remotest way suggests that a peaceable man should turn lawbreaker, or that any man should dye his hands in his brother's blood. In order to secure as far as possible positive information about the life and character of Robert Charles, it was plain that the best course to pursue was to communicate with those with whom he had sustained business relations. Accordingly, a letter was forwarded to Mr. D.J. Flummer, who is president of the Colonization Society, in which letter he was asked to state in reply what information he had of the life and character of Robert Charles. The result was a very prompt letter in response, the text of which is as follows. Birmingham, Alabama, August the 21st, 1900. Mrs. Ida B. Wells, Barnett, Chicago, Illinois. Dear Madam, replying to your favor of recent date, requesting me to write you giving such information as I may have concerning the life, habits, and character of Robert Charles, who recently shot and killed police officers in New Orleans, I wish to say that my knowledge of him is only such as I have gained from my business connection with him with the International Migration Society during the past 5 or 6 years, during which time I was president of the society. He, having learned that the purpose of this society was to colonize the colored people in Liberia, West Africa, and thereby lessen or destroy the friction and prejudice existing in this country between the two races, set about earnestly and faithfully distributing the literature that we issued from time to time. He always appeared to be mild but earnest in his advocacy of immigration, and never to my knowledge used any method or means that would in the least appear unreasonable, and had methods or means that and had always kept within the bounds of the law and order in advocating immigration. The work he performed for this society was all gratuitous, and apparently prompted from his love of humanity, and desires to be instrumental in building up a Negro nationality in Africa. If he ever violated a law before the killing of policemen, I do not know of it. Yours very truly, D.J. Flummer. Besides this statement, Mr. Flummer enclosed a letter received by the Society 2 days before the tragedy at New Orleans. This letter was written by Robert Charles and attests to his devotion to the cause of immigration, which he had espoused. Memoranda on the margin of the letter shows that the order was filled by mailing the pamphlets. It is very probable that these were the identical pamphlets which were found by the mob which broke into the room of Robert Charles and seized upon these harmless documents and declared that they were sufficient evidence to prove Charles a desperado. In the light of subsequent events, the letter of Charles which follows sounds like a voice from the tomb. New New Orleans, July the 30th, 1900. Mr. DJ Flummer, dear sir, I received your last pamphlets and they are all given out. I want you to send me some more and I enclose you the stamps I think I will go over in Greenville, Mississippi and give my people some pamphlets over there. Yours truly, Robert Charles. The latest word of information comes from New Orleans from a man who knew Charles intimately for 6 years. For obvious reasons, his name is withheld. In answer to a letter sent him, he answers as follows. New Orleans, August 23rd, 1900. Mrs. Ida B. Wells Barnett. Dear Madam, it affords me great pleasure to inform you as far as I know of Robert Charles. I have been acquainted with him about 6 years in this city. He never has, as I know, given any trouble to anyone. He was quiet and a peaceful man and was very frank in speaking. He was too much of a hero to die. Few can be found to equal him. I am very sorry to say that I do not know anything of his birthplace, nor his parents, but enclosed fine letter from his uncle, from which you may find more information. You will also find one of the circulars in which Charles was in possession of, which was styled as a crazy document. Let me say, until our preachers preach this document, we will always be slaves. If you could help circulate this crazy doctrine, I would be glad to have you do so, for I shall never rest until I get to that heaven on earth, that is the west coast of Africa, in Liberia. With best wishes to you, I still remain, as always, for the good of the race. By only those whose anger and vindictiveness warp their judgment is Robert Charles a desperado. Their word is not supported by the statement of a single fact which justifies their judgment, and no criminal record shows that he was ever indicted for any offense, much less convicted of crime. On the contrary, his work for many years had been with Christian people, circulating immigration pamphlets and active as agent for a mission publication. Men who knew him say that he was a law-abiding, quiet, industrious, peaceable man. So he lived, and so he would have died had not he raised his hand in recent unprovoked assault and unlawful arrest that fateful Monday night. That made him an outlaw, and being a man of courage, he decided to die with his face to the foe. The white people of this country may charge that he was a desperado, but the people of his own race, Robert Charles will always be regarded as the hero of New Orleans. But yeah, that ends that reading piece. There was one footnote in here. Let me see if I can find it again. Okay, they talk about in the bosom of Sheol, and it has Sheol, the abode of the dead in the early Hebrew thought. So kind of like a Tartarus or Hades, if you'll take the Greek comparison in Hebrew, early Hebrew thought. But yeah, um, so yeah, we see, even though Robert Charles himself did nothing wrong and ended up, he was just trying to defend himself. Everything was used as an excuse to try to smear his name, to try to make it seem like they were justified in lynching him. But as we know, lynching is not justified in any reason or any form. It just isn't. It's utterly ridiculous. And everybody who knew of Charles or about Charles, they said he seemed a kind and gentle man, very interested in self education, of, you know, the idea of immigration back to, or immigration to Africa. So yeah, but because the mob was so hate filled, so vicious, instead they brought about his death, and to try to give the mob cover, the newspapers in New Orleans smeared him, attacked his reputation and everything he did as notorious or vicious. It kind of reminds me a lot of the way Fox News treated Obama. Oh, his preacher is a notorious anti-white. It's like, oh, he's wearing a disgustingly tan suit. He should have. He should be ashamed of that. You know. And yet we see how they coddle Trump's ball sack. So it shows just how two-faced they really are. And look, I've made it clear I'm no fan of Trump, and I'm no fan of Obama. I thought he was a very meh president. But he was still leaps and jumps better than Trump. Which, that's not saying a lot, because Trump's the worst I have ever seen to be president. There is no argument that anybody can bring me that shows Trump is the best. Because from what I've seen, he is the worst president ever. But I'm not here to talk about presidents. Just kind of giving you a comparison on how they treated the Negro man, the African American man, woman, child. It didn't matter. But yeah, propaganda was all a big part of it. Got to make sure that white mob is doing the right thing. So let's make it seem like it's like, yeah. But With that, we'll go ahead and end this episode. As always, educate thyself. Think, read, study, learn. Someone tells you something you have trouble believing, ask them to cite their sources. I'll be putting my links and sources in the description box below the video, which I don't have any, so you don't have to worry. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you all in the next one. Until then, later.